Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this latest broadcast in the No Peace Without Justice series of Beyond COVID-19, in which we look at the impact of the global pandemic on human rights issues. Tonight, we are going to be talking about life under siege in Amazonia. And just as a reminder, if you are tweeting about this out there, please do use the hashtag Beyond COVID-19. As we know, last summer, terrible fires devastated the Amazon, both caused by and uncovering human rights abuses and violations. Now we have fire season again just around the corner, and we have the global pandemic and the very real threat of COVID-19. My name is Alison. I'm with No Peace Without Justice. I'm joined tonight by four wonderful panelists. Adriana Ramos with Instituto Socioambiental, Caetano Scannavino with the NGO Progetto Sade e Alegria, Roberto Smeraldi, journalist and chef and expert on Amazonia, and Antonella Dentamaro with the Nando and Elsa Peretti Foundation. And for full disclosure, the Nando and Elsa Peretti Foundation do support the work of No Peace Without Justice in the Amazon, for which we're very grateful. And I would like to take this opportunity as well to thank Elsa Peretti herself for her leadership and commitment to these very important issues. We're going to have a first round from our panelists, and then we'll see a video from Roiti Metuktire, an Indigenous leader who will be speaking from his village in self-isolation. But we'll get started with the first round, in which I'm asking our panelists to tell us what do we need to know about the situation in the Amazon right now. And Caetano, I'll start with you, because I know you do a lot of work on the ground in Indigenous communities, working with these communities. And I wanted to ask you, what's your perspective? What are you seeing in terms of the human rights situation and the impact of COVID-19?
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity of being here. And we talk and debate a little bit about the reality in the Brazilian Amazon. And good to see you, good to see my friends, Adriana, Roberto, all of you. We are concerned. I'm talking exactly from Tapajós River. We are in the board with Amazon province, Amazon state. That's the first region that came in a healthy system collapsing. And we are maybe in one or a couple of weeks going in the same way in this Tapajós region. And we work with indigenous people, with repairing people in the rainforest. So there are several difficulties. Everybody has a problem today, even big cities, but exactly these people, the indigenous people, they doesn't have a historic of meeting with people in the big cities, so they are more vulnerable for kinds of respiratory disease. So the cold is the thing that more kill indigenous people in the history of Brazil. And when the people here get cold, they get different. You feel that it's strong if you compare with someone in a big city. And so, because they are in contact with a lot of virus and white people virus, the indigenous people used to say. So they have this difficult. Another difficult is because they live far away from the hospitals, from the city, sometimes 2 days, 3 days, and there is no mobile phone, there is no communication, no energy. The notification situation is crazy here in the Amazon. And another point is the collapse. Why start in the Amazon and not in São Paulo and Rio, for example? That's the question. Because the collapse doesn't mean exactly the quantity of infections or people infected, but the quantity versus the capacity for the health system receive everybody at the same time. And in Brazil, the Amazon always is in the last place when we are talking about hospital equipment, sanitation, education, health primary attention. So we are ashamed if we see the dates about the Amazon. For example, if we compare pulmonary respiratory, for example, that's something that can save one life per week in a corona situation. In São Paulo, we have one equipment per 2.4 people. In Amapá, one for 13. In Amazon, in Santarém, where I live, one for 20,000 people. So we have a lot of reasons to be concerned about that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for describing that situation. I'm going to turn to you now, Roberto, and ask you a similar question, but also perhaps with more of a, also looking at, what's the impact on human rights, because there's already been human rights violations in the Amazon. So what's your experience? What are your thoughts about what's happening now across the Amazonia and the impact of the COVID-19 on human rights violations? You need to unmute, Roberto.
Sorry, just learning. My first thought is about the fact that people need to really understand that while everybody is concerned or even scared in these days around the world, but in the case of the indigenous people, it is a different threat. And not just because of the vulnerability to respiratory diseases, as Caetano just explained, but because of this is a systemic threat. It's a threat not to an individual, it's a threat to a whole people. I mean, what is at stake is a potential genocide of many people. I mean, this already happened. I mean, we know what happened with the indigenous people over these last few centuries with cold, with influenza, with measles, and I mean, it led to extinction of probably maybe 500 people at least in the Amazon, and probably 6 to 12 million people, that in comparison to the 2-year-0 of this period. So we need to deal with a threat to the very existence of people, and this is different in relation to how we deal with the threat of COVID-19 everywhere else. The second thing is that to respond to your specific question. Before, I think it's important to keep in mind that everybody in these days thinks how we are going to restart whatever, and we have to change everything, we have to rethink everything, infrastructure, culture, human relations, you name it. Okay, so the essential role of diversity, and I'm not talking about biological diversity, but human diversity, is absolutely essential in these to perform these tasks. And if not just we save indigenous people, but if we don't listen to indigenous people with their lesson of resilience, because those who are used to divide once they reach a certain number of people and to split into 2 different villages and to respond to the threats and the difficulties of life by this kind of established mechanism they know how to do it. So we need to keep this in touch. And now I just forgot your last question, which was
It was actually a question about the human rights impact. If you could,
Oh, yeah. And the
really
fact
very
that
quickly answer
this
that.
comes, yes, and the fact that this comes at a time where we discussed these during last year crisis of the fire. That was not, the top moment, of the crisis. It was the starting of a process to go backwards to a rhythm of deforestation leading to fires, which is related. And this is confirming this year. And so if we link the increasing number of invasions, all this gold stuff, I mean, why? Gold is skyrocketing in terms of price. Of course, currencies go down, gold standards come back, and not people to make jewelry, but I mean, central banks are accumulating gold. So the gold fever is there and means invasions everywhere. So this is the human rights part. I mean, why the increasing invasions means an additional threat for these people.
Thank you very much. But you're talking about the listening to the people. I think you're talking about governments, institutions, public policy, various things like this. And I know, Adriana, that this is something that you work on. And I wanted to ask you to help contextualize all of this. If you could tell us a little bit about what are some of the institutional and public policy issues that are being faced that are perhaps complicating the situation at the moment.
Okay, well, thank you for No Peace Without Justice for the invitation also, and the opportunity to share this concern with you. I think that Brazil is already living a very hard situation in terms of indigenous people's rights, the community's rights, and environmental policies. And what we are seeing is that this pandemic situation is increasing a lot of autocratic measures. So the government is taking the opportunity to increase the measures against indigenous rights, to try to make it more flexible, the environmental legislations, although it wouldn't have the reasons to do that, but they are getting this opportunity. So this is part of our struggle. We have the struggle with the virus, we have the struggle with the government, and the expectation of the government of opening indigenous territories, for example, for external activities, which has been providing a support for the illegal actions of logging and gold mining, as Roberto said, inside indigenous territories. So it seems that can increase at this moment. The government, just to give an idea, just fired the director of protection of the environmental federal agents because he was leading actions to put gold miners outside of indigenous territories. So it's very clear the sign that the government gives on support of the illegal activities that, as Paulo Moutinho, a famous researcher on the Amazon, has said recently, it's not in quarantine. So the illegality is still going on in the region. That also brings the threat of contamination for indigenous people. So the main cases we have been seeing, for example, in the state of Roraima, are related to the agencies of health that works with the Yanomami, indigenous people, which are one of the regions more affected by gold mining established illegally. I think that this perspective of using the pandemic to strengthen the setbacks on social, environmental, and human rights issues is one of our main challenges at this moment. But there are specific challenges, such as, for example, the health system that attends indigenous people is focused in dealing with indigenous people inside the territories. But there are a lot of indigenous people living in the cities, and those are the ones that are more under threat at this moment because of the virus. We had almost, I think it was like 7 deaths on indigenous people living in cities. And there is no special service for attend them. So, and we don't know how far these people have been coming and going, although we have been doing a strong work together with all the indigenous movement to raise information about the prevention that they should take and the reason why they should stay in their territories without not leaving. But there is also this threat that the only support that the government is announcing for the more vulnerable people in Brazil is a financial support that people have to go to the bank to take the money out. So that is a movement that goes against the idea on keep in the villages, stay there, you know. So there are a lot of threats in terms of how to deal with the situation and how to prevent that it gets worse. We are trying to organize information, to monitor what's going on, to report to our indigenous partners so that we can help them to understand what's going on and the risks and to prevent themselves, but also trying to support the communities with food, prevention and security equipments in a safe way, which is not very easy also because the government haven't put in place any kind of support in terms of distribution of food or other demands that the indigenous people can have. So it's also worrying that we will probably begin again the fire season, in which the health problems in the region increase also, especially regarding issues related to what the COVID attacks. So it's probably that the scenario will get worse.
Thank you. And I think, I mean, it's what you said about people taking advantage of COVID-19 in a way to go on and violate rights and do whatever they want is a particularly important one and something that we all need to resist. So I wanted to ask you, Antonella, based on your experience, your engagement on human rights in the region. I mean, we're all, you know, facing similar restrictions in one sense, in terms of the lockdown and so on. But obviously, the inequalities that are at the base of everything make me wonder, from your perspective, what do you see in terms of the longer term impact on human rights once this situation hopefully is over?
Thank you, Alison. Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here with you tonight. Yes, I want to bring you my perspective as a donor in time of the pandemic, something that we didn't see coming, but on the other hand, something that is not a surprise. As human beings, we are now all in this together. And this is because we see that we are going to suffering for the restriction of our freedom in the next months. We have to decide what of our personal data we want to share to protect our health and survival. Modern democracies are going to pay the price of not protecting the biodiversity as a human rights, allowing the spillover of a little virus that makes all of us vulnerable without any chance to be left in peace, exactly as we have so far attempted to do with indigenous people in the Amazon. The difference is that while we have access to the law as a protection of our freedoms and our survival, the political effect of this pandemic instead risks being truly, definitely lethal for those who have seen their rights trampled by the strongest, more than the virus itself. The human rights divide risks becoming the status quo of our civil coexistence. That's why the Peretti Foundation is supporting the No Peace Without Justice Amazon project to ensure indigenous people's full and effective participation in decision-making on legislative or administrative measures concerning their lands, territories, or resources. No one has to be exploited by their rights, human, political, and civil rights.
All very good points. Thank you very much for that. Well, now, as we mentioned at the beginning of this webcast, we have a video intervention from Roiti Metuktire, an Indigenous leader who's speaking from his village in self-isolation. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we can only show you a part of the intervention that he prepared, but we will be sharing the full intervention in the coming days on social media. So what I would like to give the floor now to the video, to Roiti, to share his perspective on the added threats of COVID-19 in light of ongoing threats to Indigenous land, life, and survival, if this works.
Vendo pelos sites de monitoramento que, além dessa doença, o desmatamento e as queimadas têm aumentado muito na região amazônica, e isso tem nos preocupado muito. E a gente, como liderança jovem, a gente se preocupa muito, porque além dessas ameaças, a gente corre o risco de ser contaminados por quem está invadindo os nossos territórios. Então, a gente pede a todas as autoridades que nos ajudem a proteger o nosso território, que é tão importante, não só para nós, como para o mundo. Nós, povos indígenas, pedimos a vocês que estão do outro lado que nos ajudem a proteger o que é tão importante para o mundo, que é o meio ambiente. Não deixar destruir, não deixar entrar garimpo, não deixar vir madeireiro e nem grileiro, porque eles destroem muito, tá? A gente se preocupa muito com isso. Hoje, tá assim, a minha comunidade está muito feliz hoje. A gente não quer vê-los tristes. E é isso que a gente, como nós, jovens, a gente quer para o nosso povo, o bem, tendo o necessário para viver. Hoje, aqui, a gente ainda continua seguindo o nosso dia a dia, buscando comidas na floresta, buscando alimentos do rio, aproveitando de tudo que a gente tem usufruto. E até o momento não está faltando nada para nós, somente esse medo dessa doença e dessas invasões que podem ocorrer. E como muitos poderes estão parados, algumas pessoas aproveitam esse momento crítico que a gente está para fazer o mal, não só para nós, como para nossas terras, né, os nossos rios, os nossos animais. Então a gente teme por isso.
Thank you. And as I said, that was not all that he had to say, and we will be sharing the rest of his intervention through our social media in the coming days. So please do watch. It's important to listen to what he has to say. Now we will move to the last round before we close. And as I mentioned, what I'd like to hear from everybody is we've discussed the situation. We've heard a little bit about the challenges that are being faced. So the question is now, what can we do? And I'll start with you, Antonella, because the Peretti Foundation supports a lot of human rights work around the world. And having heard everything and seeing how things are for the people that you work with and the organizations and people that you support, what lessons are you drawing in terms of from a donor perspective, and what more do you think other philanthropists could do?
Yes, talk about what donors and philanthropists are going to see in this new era of the pandemic. So it's not easy, it never has been, working on the protection of human rights, not for human rights defender and non-governmental organization, nor for donors. But now what we are seeing is a contraction of funds for human rights in international cooperation projects. It's understandable, of course. We are all focused on how to defeat the virus, and all our efforts are directed to our countries. But this is the time to be generous and flexible as a donor. We must be good partners and a source of meaningful support during the coming months, so that civil society groups can focus on the vital work of supporting some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. That's why we, as a foundation, sign and share the appeal launched by the European Foundation Center and Daphne. And we are committed to considering to allow our beneficiary to use their funding to help cover sickness, purchase equipment, or deliver services differently. And we will be reasonable if they need to move money between budget headings to ensure their work can continue. And this is what we are doing together with many other donors.
Thank you, Antonella. We are very grateful for that. And I hope that other donors can also follow your lead in adopting that kind of flexibility during this time of crisis. Adriana, coming back to you, when you were talking about what the government has been doing that's been not helpful, what should the international community be doing in order to support human rights and indigenous communities in Amazonia? And by the international community, I mean more speaking about other states and the United Nations and so on. What kinds of approaches should they be adopting at this critical time? You're on mute, Adriana.
Yes, I'm sorry. I had a small problem here. I was not sure you were asking me. Well, I think that there are different levels of demand. I think that the more urgent demand is the support for the communities in terms of what they need to protect themselves and to deal with the pandemic itself. So I think that we expect from the supporters that they are flexible in terms of adapting and managing the resources that are in place that were directed to activities that won't happen now that can be used for that. So I think that that's the first step. The second thing, it's the thing that is related to what will come in the future. So we are already seeing people talking about the economic crash, thinking about solutions and investments in infrastructure in the Amazon as a solution to the economic development further. And we know that in this moment, considering what's already happening, the perspective is that human rights safeguards or standards on sustainability will be left behind. So we must focus on guaranteeing that we won't accept that the rebuilding of our economies in general will guarantee more impacts. So I think that people have to challenge their governments, the companies in general, so that they do not come together in an effort of rebuilding economy that will strengthen the challenges on human rights and sustainability, especially in the Amazon. And I think that in a broader way, we have to recognize that, especially when we talk about the Amazon and in Brazil right now, the main challenges we have are the connection between what goes on in terms of unsustainability and the government, the public policies that are in place. So we must recognize this connection so that we find a way to which we are going to address this kind of things, recognizing that our political system also needs a shift and that we have to somehow support civil society to build this strength to face this challenge, the size it is. So I think we have different levels. We have to start by dealing with the today's problems of communities so that they can protect themselves, but also preview that we have broader issues that we will have to address with a strong civil society, and we will need to support organizations and social movements to accept this challenge and to do what must be done.
Thank you. And I think, yes, listening to people is a very important thing, which is a point also that Roberto had made earlier in the conversation. So Roberto, I wanted to ask you now, you maybe can hear in my voice, I'm Australian, and my country basically burnt down earlier this year as well. And one thing that was being discussed a lot within Australia around that time was, what can we learn in terms of protecting ourselves from fire management and things like this from our Indigenous communities? So I wanted to ask you the same. What can you learn, and what can we support in terms of Indigenous community responses?
Yes, Alison, I really think this is crucial, and it is crucial, the link between the short term and the medium term, as Adriana pointed out. I mean, you have the emergence. I mean, the video didn't show maybe part of the story when the Kayapo actually took action to close down the access roads, and this means working as guards there, and spending time, and using fuel, and creating blockades, and etc. I mean, so sometimes small support for projects like those, I mean, 10,000 euro here, 20,000 euros there, whatever, really make the difference, can save people, not just individuals. And this is crucial. But this is linked to exactly the need to have the input from these people in managing land, because they just know how to manage land, and they did it for ages. So if we are going, just as an example, to live, not just because of viruses, but because of also other vectors, like due to climate change, in terms of a number of pandemics brought by insects, etc., and as well as with the erosion of biodiversity, a lot of viruses jumping in terms of hosts from other hosts where they adapted to new abundant hosts. Well, okay, if this is the situation we are going to face, it is crucial that we have people in the field to manage those territories. And it is amazing how the indigenous people perform a task that it's unpaid. It's the task of enforcement, is the task of management, is the task of doing a number of things that would be attributes of state, but they do it for free, and this is not something that usually people think. So what means actually helping indigenous people? Means actually paying a small share of the services they provide, and that's, I think, the shift in the medium term.
Thank you very much. And I could see Caetano nodding along with the last point you were making. There is one question now I want to ask you, Caetano, in terms of moving forward. And we've heard a little bit in what people have been saying about the need for development and how we're going to need economic development after all of this crisis. Now, this is assuming, of course, that development is a good thing, but I wanted to ask you, in terms of development in Amazonia and in respective indigenous communities, what sort of approach should be adopted? What should we be looking to support and to encourage our governments to support in terms of development in Amazonia?
Well, this is that's a good question. But when we think about development, I think we have to think about whole situation of development. Once, for example, Brazil is 80% urban. Doesn't mean that Amazonia it's not urban. It's about 75%, if I'm not wrong. And so we have to think about the relationship between the city and between the hero zones. Once the people today in the hero zones, they go often, every day more, with more frequency to the cities, and for the virus now, it's terrible when they go there to go to the bank, supermarket, buy things like that. So if we have a solution for 25 million people that lives in the Brazilian Amazon city and rural area, if we have also development employer solutions inside the towns, of course, we are going to reduce the pressure over rural areas, conservation units, indigenous territory. So it's important to think about everything. For example, the debate today for me is totally wrong when the president brings to the round table development versus environmental, NGOs versus progress. It's not. That's bullshit. Sorry about the. What we have to talk is what to do with a situation where in the Brazilian Amazon we put fire, we devastated, we deforested the area equivalent to Germany's to do what? 63% of this area is occupied today for cattle ranching with very, very bad productivity, less than one cow, one animal per hectare. Another 23% we abandon it. So we are killing the forest and becoming at the same time more poor. So what to do with that? So how we can start to think in the places where there is already agriculture to improve the quality, the efficiency of this agriculture, but do not think about the future or the vector of the development for the Amazon region with cows or soybeans. We are in a climate change crisis. The green forest today is economy also. Why we do not have policies to empower, for example, the bioeconomy like andiroba, like açaí, like what my friend does with the good kitchen, my friend Smeraldi, and why we do not think about industry of biodiversity. And we are talking about knowledge that comes from the traditional population when we are gonna extract oil from a forest specimen. And for example, if we talk about açaí agroforest systems, we can make more than $1,000 money per hectare, comparing with cow, a little bit more than $100 per hectare. So there are solutions, but the view, and the view not only this government, the view of the Brazilian society has to change. And I think that with this pandemic, maybe we can take the opportunity to think about what we are doing with the Amazon and the future, and how we can reset some waves of think.
Thank you very much. Sorry, having troubles unmuting. And thank you for that positive note at the end. I think that you've just given all those millions of Twitter users complaining about how bored they are something to do while they're in lockdown. So thank you very much for that. We have come to the end of our discussion. I really want to thank each and every one of you for being here with us. I learned a great deal. I have actually a bit more optimism than I did when I first started on the program. So I want to thank you for that as well. Lots of good ideas for things that we can do to help. we'll close there, but just a reminder that the full intervention from Roiti Metuktire will be available on our social media networks and on our website, which is npwj.org, where you can also find more information about our work in Amazonia, about other broadcasts in this Beyond COVID-19 series. And I will conclude by inviting everybody to join us next week at the same time in the same channels when we're going to be discussing Syria. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening. And everybody, have a good evening and afternoon wherever you are. Thank you again very much.
Thank you. Thank you too. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.